A bright and bustling morning at JFK International Airport, with streams of travelers rushing through the gates, announcements echoing continuously, and the steady hum of rolling suitcases filling the air. Amidst the hurried scene, Andrew walked confidently in his crisp uniform. His navy blue blazer was immaculately pressed, and the golden insignia on his lapel gleamed as he assisted passengers with their pre-flight inquiries. Andrew had been with the airline for over a decade, starting as a flight attendant and gradually working his way up to his current position. A strong yet discreet leader, holding a key role in the company's executive team. Despite being the CEO, he still enjoyed putting on his old uniform, blending in with the crew and connecting with passengers. Today was one of those rare occasions. He greeted passengers warmly at the boarding gate, his politeness standing in stark contrast to a group of VIP travelers lingering near the luxury lounge. Their mocking laughter rang out clearly amidst the busy terminal. "That flight attendant looks desperate for tips, doesn't he?" one of them sneered, his gaze dripping with condescension as he glanced toward Andrew. "Probably trying to impress someone for a promotion," another scoffed, his tone filled with disdain. Andrew heard every word, yet his face remained composed as if nothing had happened. Over a decade in the industry had taught him how to handle rudeness with grace and professionalism. To him, the most important thing was ensuring a safe and comfortable journey for all passengers. As the wealthy passengers boarded the plane, their arrogance became even more apparent in the way they disregarded the crew's instructions and demanded immediate service. As the lead flight attendant for today's flight, Andrew kept a discreet watch on them, ready to step in if their entitlement crossed the line. Inside the aircraft, their behavior escalated. One of them rudely snapped his fingers, summoning a young flight attendant who was serving drinks. "Hey, tell your supervisor to bring me more ice for my champagne," he ordered condescendingly, not even bothering to look at the crew member. Andrew stepped forward, his gaze calm yet sharp. "Sir, how may I assist you?" he asked, his voice steady and professional. The man looked Andrew up and down, his lips curling into a sneer. "Yeah, get me someone who can actually speak proper English," he scoffed, laughing along with his companions, his gaze dripping with mockery. The young flight attendant behind Andrew hesitated, clearly unsettled, but Andrew gently placed a reassuring hand on her arm before turning back to the rude passenger. "Of course, sir," he replied smoothly, his tone unwavering. "I'll take care of that right away." As he turned to retrieve the ice, one of the men muttered under his breath, his voice laced with disdain. "Well, what do you expect from an immigrant flight attendant? They're born to serve." Andrew clenched his jaw but maintained his composed demeanor. He had encountered people like this many times in his career, and today was no exception. What they didn't know, however, was that this flight was far from ordinary, and the lesson they were about to learn would stay with them for a lifetime. The engines hummed softly as the plane glided smoothly through the sky. Most passengers were settled in, enjoying their meals or scrolling through their personal devices. But in business class, the arrogant group remained as disruptive as ever. One of them, a man wearing an extravagant watch that gleamed under the cabin lights, leaned back in his seat, smirking. "Hey, steward," he snapped his fingers again, his sharp voice cutting through the previously peaceful atmosphere, drawing irritated glances from nearby passengers. Andrew stepped forward, his signature calm demeanor unwavering. What the man didn't realize was that this time, he had awakened a storm he never saw coming. "Yes, sir, how may I assist you?" Andrew replied smoothly, his voice steady. The man jerked his chin toward the meal tray in front of him, his gaze filled with disdain. "This chicken is too dry. Do you have anything better, or is this the best you people can manage?" His tone oozed arrogance, and the phrase "you people" hung in the air like an unspoken slap. Andrew remained composed, but a nearby passenger furrowed his brow, clearly uncomfortable with the exchange. "I'm sorry to hear that you're not satisfied, sir," Andrew responded, his tone polite yet resolute. "Let me see what I can do to improve your dining experience." Before he could step away, another member of the group chimed in. A woman, draped in a designer ensemble, flipped her sleek hair over her shoulder and interjected with a smirk. "While you're at it, could you tell whoever designed this plane to make the seats more comfortable? They're not as luxurious as I expected." She paused, her eyes gleaming with mockery. "Oh wait, do you even understand what I'm saying, sweetheart?" Her companions erupted into laughter, as if she had just delivered the wittiest joke of the evening. Andrew stood tall, his hands neatly clasped in front of him. "I assure you, ma'am, that we always value our passengers' feedback," he replied, his voice courteous yet unwavering. "Is there anything else I can assist you with?" The woman rolled her eyes, letting out a huff. "Just don't mess up my order like last time," she said dismissively. As Andrew turned to fulfill their requests, the murmurs of mockery trailed behind him. I don't know where they find these people, one of the men scoffed, his voice laced with derision. Probably just cheap labor. What they failed to realize was that the other passengers had started to take notice. A middle-aged couple seated just behind them exchanged uneasy glances, their discomfort evident. Across the aisle, a young man discreetly lifted his phone, quietly recording the unfolding scene. In the aircraft's galley, Andrew paused for a moment to collect himself. He had encountered rude passengers before, but something about this particular group unsettled him. A quiet instinct told him, this wasn't going to be just another routine flight. Their arrogance cut like a blade against his pride, but Andrew reminded himself of the most important lesson he had learned in his career: composure is power. You okay, Andrew? A young flight attendant asked hesitantly. He gave a reassuring smile. I'm fine. Let's just focus on ensuring all passengers are well taken care of. Though his exterior remained calm, deep down, he knew that this group of rude passengers was about to receive a lesson, one that fate seemed to have meticulously arranged. The aircraft had reached cruising altitude, and most passengers had settled in, immersed in their own activities. The cabin lights dimmed slightly, creating a tranquil atmosphere as the crew prepared for a smooth stretch of the flight. Andrew resumed his rounds, methodically checking each row, ensuring that every passenger was comfortable and well attended to. Suddenly, a loud thud echoed through the business class cabin. The man wearing the expensive watch, the one who had exuded arrogance throughout the flight, collapsed onto the aisle. His companions sprang from their seats in panic. Somebody help, one of them shouted. He's not breathing. The tranquility of the cabin instantly shattered into chaos. Passengers craned their necks, whispering anxiously, their faces etched with concern. The flight crew sprang into action, but Andrew was the first to respond. He swiftly knelt beside the man, his voice calm yet commanding. Sir, can you hear me? He asked, gently tapping the man's shoulder, his sharp eyes scanning for any critical signs. The man's face was ghostly pale, beads of sweat forming on his forehead. One of his friends, now visibly frantic, nearly lost control. Do something. Don't just stand there and watch, he barked. Andrew ignored the rising panic around him and quickly assessed the situation. He checked the man's pulse, noting how weak and irregular it had become. Years of training had prepared him for this exact moment. Find a doctor on board immediately. Bring the first aid kit now. His voice was firm, authoritative, one that commanded action. At this moment, true power wasn't about wealth or status, it was in the hands of the one who knew how to save a life when it mattered most. Andrew turned to a young flight attendant and issued clear instructions. Search for a doctor among the passengers right away. And bring me the emergency medical kit. Then, shifting his focus, he addressed the group of shaken passengers. Is he on any medication? Does he have any pre-existing medical conditions we should know about? The once arrogant group, who had exuded nothing but entitlement throughout the flight, now stood frozen in fear and confusion. I don't know, one of them stammered, eyes darting helplessly. He's never mentioned anything like this before. The tension in the cabin grew heavier as Andrew continued to act with precision and expertise. Passengers around them fell silent, watching in awe at his remarkable composure amidst the chaos. Within seconds, an oxygen mask was secured over the man's pale face. Andrew carefully adjusted the oxygen flow, his eyes never leaving the patient. Another flight attendant rushed over with the first aid kit, but it was clear that Andrew had already taken full control of the situation. We need to keep him stable until we can determine his condition, Andrew stated, his voice calm yet authoritative. Then, unexpectedly, a passenger from the economy class section stepped forward. I'm a doctor, the man said, his voice firm yet reassuring. Can I assist? I'm a doctor. Can I assist? Andrew looked up, gratitude flashing in his eyes. Thank you. Please go ahead, he said, stepping aside to allow the doctor room to work. The doctor knelt beside him, swiftly assessing the patient. Within moments, he glanced up at Andrew, his expression filled with respect. You've done everything perfectly. He's lucky to have someone so well trained here, the doctor remarked. Those words carried weight, resonating through the cabin. The once arrogant group who had mocked Andrew earlier now sat in stunned silence. Their eyes shifted uneasily between their unconscious friend and the very man they had belittled, who had just saved his life. Their pride and entitlement had vanished, replaced with a stark, humbling realization. As Andrew and the doctor continued to work in tandem, stabilizing the patient, the entire atmosphere in the cabin shifted. The murmurs of disdain, the mocking laughter, gone. Instead, a profound silence settled over business class, filled with nothing but quiet reverence and newfound respect. The atmosphere, once filled with arrogance and contempt, was now replaced by respect and admiration. Gradually, the unconscious man regained some color in his face, his breathing becoming steadier. Though still weak, he had passed the most critical moment. And the group who had spent the flight mocking Andrew, now found themselves facing an undeniable truth. The man they had dismissed with ridicule was the very one who had saved their friend from the brink of death. The man remained weak, but his breathing was stable. His head rested on pillows that Andrew had carefully arranged for maximum comfort. One of his companions, the same one who had been so loud and dismissive earlier, turned to Andrew, his voice unsteady. "Thank you," he stammered, his arrogance completely gone, replaced with rare humility. "I don't know what we would have done without you." Andrew gave a small nod, his expression calm, free of judgment. He didn't need their apologies. The lesson had already been delivered. Ensuring the safety of all passengers is my responsibility. As Andrew stood up, adjusting his uniform with practiced precision, his gaze unintentionally met that of another passenger, one who had silently observed the entire incident unfold. The man gave him a subtle thumbs up, a quiet gesture of acknowledgement and respect. Andrew responded with a small, knowing smile, a silent exchange of understanding. What the passengers didn't know, however, was that the surprises on this flight were not yet over. As the plane continued its journey, the tension that had once filled the cabin gradually dissipated. The once arrogant group now sat in silence. Their appearance remained polished, their wealth and status unchanged, but something within them had shifted. The air of entitlement was gone, replaced by gratitude, and perhaps a touch of shame. The man who had regained consciousness was still weak, but under the careful watch of Andrew, the doctor, and the rest of the cabin crew, he had made it through the worst. Meanwhile, the flight attendants resumed their duties, ensuring that peace and order were restored to the cabin. The journey pressed on, but for some on board, it would be a flight they would never forget. In the galley, Andrew took a moment to collect his thoughts. He adjusted his blazer and took a deep breath. Moments like this were what defined his career, a career not just about work but about responsibility, compassion, and professionalism. Just as he was about to continue checking the passenger cabin, a young flight attendant approached him, hesitating. "Andrew," she whispered, "a passenger wants to see you. They're asking about your position." Andrew raised an eyebrow but didn't hesitate. "All right. I'll handle it." He walked out to the business class cabin. The group of wealthy passengers were still gathered around their friend, their faces still stunned. The woman in the designer outfit, who had mocked him earlier, looked up, her gaze hesitant as if preparing to say something unfamiliar to her, an apology. The woman, now with less arrogance, subtly signaled for Andrew to come closer. "I'm sorry," she spoke, her voice much gentler than before. "We just want to say, thank you for what you've done. I don't understand how you managed to stay so calm. Is this how you always are?" Andrew smiled politely. "It's part of our training. We are always prepared for any situation to ensure the safety of our passengers." One man from the group, the one who had mocked him loudly before, now spoke up, his face full of curiosity. "But, it's not just about training. You seem different. It's like you've done more than that. What exactly do you do for this airline?" Andrew hesitated for a moment. He had never liked the attention, but the sincerity in their voices made him reconsider. "Let's just say, I've been with this airline for a long time," he answered cautiously. The doctor sitting nearby overheard the conversation and chuckled softly. "You can be as humble as you like, but we've all seen it. That calmness and leadership ability don't just come from being a flight attendant." Suddenly, the woman who had spoken earlier spoke again, her voice slow as if she had finally realized something. "Wait, you're not just a flight attendant, are you?" Andrew exhaled softly and nodded. "No, I'm not just a flight attendant." He paused for a moment before continuing with a calm voice. "I am the CEO of this airline." The cabin fell into silence. The passengers were so stunned they couldn't find the words. A few people from other seats, those who had overheard the conversation, turned around in shock. What did you say?" The woman stammered, her face paling. Andrew gently clasped his hands in front of him, his voice still maintaining its calm and dignified tone. "I started as a flight attendant many years ago. I've worked through various roles, gradually advancing until I became the CEO. Occasionally, I return to this position to connect with my team and better understand what's happening on the front lines. His words echoed in the tight space of the business class cabin, weighing heavily on the group of passengers who had just mocked him. The man who had ridiculed him earlier now spoke, his voice full of regret. We had no idea. I mean, you're too humble." Andrew simply smiled lightly. There's no room for arrogance when your job is to serve others. The wealthy group who had once been so haughty, now fell completely silent. Their pride disappeared, replaced by confusion, embarrassment, and perhaps, a little shame. Silence enveloped the business class cabin, but this time it wasn't arrogance or indifference, it was profound respect. The other passengers whispered among themselves, expressing admiration for Andrew's humility and leadership. "You've taught us a lesson today," the woman in the designer outfit admitted, her voice tinged with remorse. "We misjudged you and we truly apologize." Andrew nodded calmly. "I appreciate your apology. But true change doesn't come from words, it comes from what we learn after these moments. Respect doesn't come from position or title. It is created through actions and compassion." He turned to walk away, but something made him pause for a moment. A small yet noticeable change in the atmosphere of the cabin. The people who had once been divided by prejudice and differences in status now sat quietly, lost in their own thoughts. But this journey wasn't over yet. There was one final lesson that still needed to be absorbed. The wealthy passengers sat in awkward silence. Their arrogance and pride had completely vanished. The man who had just recovered leaned back in his seat, his voice soft but sincere. "Thank you, for saving my life." The woman in the luxurious outfit, the one who had mocked Andrew the most, bowed her head, staring at the floor of the cabin, not daring to face anyone. Finally, one of the men in the group spoke up, breaking the tense silence. "I can't believe we treated him like that." He shook his head, his face filled with regret. "He's not just the CEO. He's the reason our friend is still alive." The woman sighed heavily. "We were so blind," she whispered. "All this time we thought status and money were everything. But he's shown us the true meaning of a leader." Another man spoke up, his voice filled with deep remorse. "Not just a leader, but respect. We didn't even treat him like a human being." These words resonated in the quiet space of the cabin, and the other passengers, those who had witnessed the entire situation, nodded gently in agreement. The final lesson had been learned. Respect isn't something you can buy with money or power. It can only be given and received through genuine sincerity. An older man sitting behind them leaned forward slightly, his voice calm but full of meaning. "Do you know?" he said gently. "It's never too late to learn a lesson in humility. She has given you a gift that you should not waste." The group of passengers looked at each other, the shame clearly visible on their faces. Finally, the woman in the designer outfit slowly stood up. She walked towards the galley where Andrew was preparing coffee for the crew. She paused for a moment, her hands unconsciously clenching together before she cleared her throat softly. "Andrew?" Her voice trembled slightly. Andrew turned around, his gaze calm but full of curiosity. "Yes, ma'am. How can I assist you?" I want to apologize." The words rushed out as if she feared that if she hesitated, she wouldn't have the courage to say them. "We were rude, dismissive, and truly out of line with you. Yet you still saved our friend's life and treated us with kindness. I am truly sorry for what happened." Andrew observed her for a moment, then smiled faintly, a smile not carrying blame or arrogance, but only sincerity. "Thank you for saying that," he replied. "Admitting mistakes is never easy, but what matters is what we learn from those mistakes." The others in the group slowly approached, each nodding in agreement. One by one they also apologized, each word filled with sincerity and regret. Andrew patiently listened, maintaining his calm and generous demeanor. "I truly appreciate your words," he said, his gaze sweeping over each person. "But remember, this isn't just about me. It's about how we treat each other as human beings. Everyone, no matter their position, deserves respect." The group of passengers nodded, the silence in their eyes showing that Andrew's words had truly touched their hearts. As they returned to their seats, something had changed, not just in the way they saw Andrew but also in the way they saw themselves. They began thanking the flight attendants when they were served, smiling politely at the passengers around them, and even engaging in genuine conversation with the doctor who had helped their friend. This change didn't go unnoticed by the other passengers. They quietly observed, some smiling, others nodding in approval. Meanwhile, Andrew continued his work, still maintaining his professional and composed demeanor. But deep inside he felt a quiet sense of fulfillment, not because he had revealed his identity, but because the lesson he had hoped to impart had truly reached those people who once seemed indifferent. As the plane gradually descended, preparing to approach the destination, the atmosphere in the cabin had completely changed. A place once divided by status, prejudice, and ego now had an invisible connection. Those who had once been arrogant were now more humble. And perhaps in the future they would no longer judge others by their outward appearance or title, but by their actions and the sincerity of their hearts. As the plane began to descend, the steady hum of the engines echoed throughout the cabin. Outside, the horizon of the destination city gradually appeared, shimmering under the afternoon sunlight. Passengers fastened their seatbelts, adjusted their trays, and prepared to leave the plane. But the atmosphere in the business class cabin was now completely different from when the flight had begun. The wealthy group who had once caused tension and mocked others, now sat in silence. Their eyes no longer held arrogance. Instead, they reflected contemplation, humility, and even a hint of regret. The woman who had once carried herself with pride in her designer outfit, now turned to her companions. Her voice was low, but there was a clear determination in it. "I think we owe him more than just an apology," she said, her tone serious. "We need to do something to prove that we've truly learned something from this." One of the men nodded in agreement. "He didn't have to treat us well after what we did. But he did. That's what true class is." The group sat back, whispering among themselves, trying to figure out a way to express their regret. This time the change was no longer superficial. It was real. The plane smoothly touched down on the runway. The captain's voice came over the intercom, thanking the passengers for choosing this airline. A round of applause echoed throughout the cabin, a common tradition when a flight lands successfully. But this time in the business class cabin, the applause held a different meaning. It wasn't just for the crew. It was for one specific person. Andrew, who was walking down the aisle to check on passengers before they disembarked, suddenly stopped when he saw the wealthy group standing, waiting for him. The woman in the designer outfit stepped forward, holding a small card tightly in her hand. "Andrew," she began, her voice firm yet full of emotion. "Before we leave, we want to thank you once again. Not only for saving our friend, but for teaching us a lesson we will never forget." The woman handed the small card to Andrew. He took it, opened it, and read quietly. It was a handwritten letter, each sentence carefully crafted, expressing their sincere gratitude and remorse. Inside the letter, there was also a receipt, a substantial donation they had made to a charity supporting airline staff in difficult circumstances. Andrew glanced over the words, then slowly looked up. A soft smile appeared on his face. He didn't say anything for a few moments, allowing the sincerity in their gesture to deeply permeate the moment. Finally, he looked directly at the group before him, his gaze warm but full of meaning. "Thank you," he said, simply yet sincerely. "Not just for this gesture, but for truly appreciating this experience. It means more than you think." The group nodded, their faces showing a sense of relief mixed with gratitude. One of the men took a step forward, his voice sincere. "You've shown us that leadership isn't about title or power. It's about how you treat people." Around them, other passengers quietly observed, admiration in their eyes. Some even approached Andrew, thanking him for his service and calm demeanor throughout the flight. The atmosphere in the cabin had completely changed. At first it had been tense and divided. But now it carried a sense of unity and appreciation for one another. Passengers began to disembark. Andrew stood at the door as always with his warm smile, bidding farewell to each person. But this time the thanks he received were different. They were sincere, deep, and full of respect. The wealthy group was among the last to leave. Before leaving, they stopped at the door, turning to look at Andrew one last time. The man who had been unconscious earlier stepped forward, his gaze sincere, no longer holding any arrogance. He extended his hand. "Thank you once again, Andrew," his voice soft but meaningful. "You didn't just save my life, you helped me reevaluate myself. You've opened our eyes to what truly matters." Andrew took the outstretched hand, a firm yet warm handshake. "Take care of yourself," he replied, his voice sincere. "And remember, every day is an opportunity to treat others well." The woman in the designer outfit hesitated for a moment, then stepped forward. "I don't know if you remember us," she said, her voice carrying a hint of awkwardness, mixed with remorse. "But we will never forget you. Thank you for your patience and compassion. You've inspired us to become better people." Andrew smiled softly, his eyes full of understanding. "It's never too late to begin," he said gently. The group quietly nodded and then walked off the plane, leaving behind a cabin full of passengers who had witnessed an incredible transformation. A small boy gently tugged at his mother's sleeve as he passed Andrew. "Mom, he's like a superhero," the boy whispered, his wide eyes full of admiration. Andrew chuckled softly, feeling his heart warmer than ever. When the last passenger left, he stood there for a moment, looking out the window toward the terminal. The sunlight filtered through the windows, casting a warm golden hue over the airport. He felt a quiet sense of fulfillment, not because of his title but because of the change he had just witnessed in people who had once been strangers, now transformed. Back in the crew room, the flight attendants gathered, their eyes full of respect as they thanked Andrew for his leadership throughout the flight. A young flight attendant, still in awe, spoke up. "Andrew, how do you manage to stay so calm and composed even when dealing with such difficult passengers?" Andrew thought for a moment before smiling. "It's not always easy," he admitted. "But I always remind myself that everyone is fighting a battle we can't see. Sometimes the only thing they need is someone patient and understanding." He paused, then added with a mischievous smile. "And sometimes, a little humility can make a huge difference." Andrew's words echoed through the room, leaving a deep impression on the crew. They nodded as if realizing a simple yet powerful truth. When the debriefing session ended, Andrew stepped out to continue his journey. He had never sought recognition or applause. For him, the real reward lay in moments like these, moments where kindness and understanding could leave a lasting impact. As he walked through the busy terminal, some passengers from the previous flight recognized him. They waved, nodded at him with eyes full of respect. A passenger even stopped, sincerely saying to him, "Thank you for reminding us what true leadership is." Andrew smiled, nodded slightly, and continued walking. His heart felt light, not because of fame or status, but because he knew that, even for just a brief moment, he had helped someone see the world in a different way, one that was more humane. Andrew's story is a powerful reminder that true strength does not lie in titles or power, but in compassion, humility, and respect. His ability to overcome challenges and treat others with dignity not only changed that group of passengers, but also transformed everyone who witnessed this journey. Andrew continued walking through the vast hallways of the airport, where natural light poured through the massive windows, reflecting the image of a new day beginning. He wasn't in a hurry. He walked slowly, savoring the rare moment when the world seemed filled with peace. In his heart, there was no pride about what he had done, only a deep sense of fulfillment. Life is a series of moments, and in what seemed like an ordinary flight, he had helped change the way some people viewed respect and compassion. As Andrew turned into a small cafe at the airport, he ordered an iced black coffee, an old habit he had after every journey. While waiting, a familiar voice called out from behind. "Andrew?" He turned around and saw the doctor from the flight, the one who had helped him in the emergency situation with the passenger. The doctor smiled and approached with a look of genuine goodwill. "I didn't expect to run into you so soon," the doctor said as he placed his coffee cup on the table. "But I just wanted to say, what you did on that flight was truly admirable. I've seen many emergencies, but very few people can remain as calm and decisive as you did." Andrew nodded, responding with a humble smile. "Thank you, but honestly I just did what needed to be done. When I put on this uniform, my responsibility is not just to manage an airline, but to ensure that everyone, from staff to passengers, feels safe and respected." The doctor nodded in agreement. "That's the difference between a leader and someone who simply holds power. You don't just manage a company, you live its values." They chatted for a while longer before the doctor had to leave for his next flight. Before departing, he lightly patted Andrew on the shoulder and said, "Keep that spirit up. The world needs more people like you." Andrew watched as the doctor disappeared into the crowd. He took a sip of his coffee, feeling the slight bitterness spread in his mouth, then quietly set the cup down. Outside, the airport remained bustling with people coming and going, each carrying their own stories and journeys. But for Andrew, the flight just completed was not just part of the job, it was a reminder that, no matter where you are or what circumstances you face, compassion and humility have the power to change people. He stood up, adjusted his blazer, and continued walking. Ahead lay another flight, a new journey, and perhaps another story waiting for him somewhere in the sky.